Hi, hello. Today I'm going to attempt to unravel a never-ending debate, one that revolves around separating art from the artist. For my sake, we're mostly going to stay in the realm of music, but a lot of the arguments that we're going to cover don't even need to be restricted to just art. We could broaden this topic to separating the achievement from the achiever, or the performance from the performer. A song, a film, any piece of art is just an idea, and an idea can be anything. In the same way that you could have an artist who releases a really great album be a really shitty person, you could also have someone who invents a groundbreaking piece of technology also be a really shitty person. Unfortunately, there comes a time in everyone's young life where they find out that the world isn't just black and white. A lot of the times, good people can do bad things, or bad people can do good things. More specifically, a bad person can create a good or even amazing piece of content that you enjoy a lot and personally attach yourself to. The saying goes, never meet your heroes, and it exists because one day you might have the chance to meet an artist who has created one of your favorite albums of all time, only to find out that they're kind of a distasteful person. Or in an extreme case, you might find out that they're actually morally reprehensible. If that's the case, then how do you go back to that favorite album of yours? Can you, or even should you, be enjoying it to the same degree that you used to? Or has it been tarnished forever because you put a face to the name, so to speak? The artist that you previously only knew through their artwork is actually a real-life individual who makes real-life decisions. And turns out you don't really like that person at all. Well, I hate to bear bad news, but there's no right or easy answer here. In fact, there's really no golden rule that you can follow when trying to separate art from the artist, because no two situations will ever be exactly the same. Any piece of artwork can affect any individual in an infinite number of ways, and any bad person can do a varying degree of bad things. The conclusion that anyone reaches in this discussion will always be a deeply personal choice. Sometimes it might not even be a choice at all. Some topics are just so sensitive or so close to home that they're just an immediate deal breaker for some people instinctually. Maybe if an artist is physically abusive or sexually abusive or is very vocally racist or is pro-life or is pro-choice or is a murderer, once you have that image of the artist in your head, you might never be able to look at them or listen to their music in the same way that you used to. That's something that happens on the very personal and even subconscious level for every person differently. To break this discussion down into some more manageable chunks, I'm going to pose a few different questions that will serve as their own chapters of sorts. I'll answer each of these questions to the best of my ability based on my own personal experience and worldview. But since this topic is just so subjective, I thought it'd be fun and enlightening to get by with a little help from my friends. So once I'm done with my own rambling, we'll go through a series of different interviews where I pose the exact same questions to some of my NYC musician friends. The more the merrier when it comes to questions of philosophy. The first question that I want to tackle is, should we separate art from the artist? Right off the bat, I want to view this question from the lens of a music listener, because from the artist's standpoint, it's basically impossible to separate yourself from the artwork that you created. The process through which an artist creates a piece of artwork is the culmination of years of experience and knowledge. It's like an artist is birthing a piece of art. It contains their unique DNA and no one else's. In that way, there's no way to ever separate art from the artist. But what about from the listener's standpoint? If you just listen to music made by someone that you don't know, or in a more strict hypothetical lab setting, I were to play music for you and I didn't tell you who created the music, you would literally be separating art from the artist because you have absolutely no idea who the artist actually is. You simply have no choice but to evaluate the music independently of the artist. Typically, this is what happens when we hear a new artist for the first time. I mean, we might know their name or know something about them based on pop culture, but it's usually not enough information to make a character judgment. So the pressure's off. You can just sit back, relax, and take in some new music at face value. The problem arises, though, when, that new band that you've been getting into, well, their lead singer actually has a pretty problematic past, or has some severe sexual assault allegations leveled at them, or has just straight up confessed to hurting other people. Now you're in a bit of a moral dilemma, and you have to ask yourself, do I actively make the decision to listen to music made by someone whom I find detestable? We're going to get into the nitty-gritty practical aspects of musical streaming and financially supporting an artist later. Let's just stick with the moral implications of, should you separate art from an artist? And in my personal opinion, I think you should whenever you have the opportunity. I think it's unnecessary to purposely avoid a musician's entire body of work just because you don't like who they are as a person. For one thing, you aren't really stopping that person from being who they are or stopping them from making music, music that you might personally enjoy. Speaking pragmatically, all you're really doing if you make the decision to not listen to an artist because they're a shitty person is that you're possibly depriving yourself of positive experiences. And this is to say, even if an artist's actions or past or history is absolutely inexcusable, that still doesn't make their music or the lyrical content of their music null and void. If someone's music gives you clarity and helps you understand yourself better or understand the world around you better, then nothing is ever going to change that. You can still like someone's music without liking them, the individual. However, this requires a pretty intentional and concerted effort to separate art from the artist. You can no longer idolize that artist or that individual. You can only really appreciate the good things that they've done. Artists just send a message, and it's up to us to receive and interpret that message however we want. And by being able to recognize an artist's fault, it kind of gives you a better opportunity to separate the art from the artist. Let's say, though, that an artist is a shitty person and you decide to stop listening to their music altogether. Maybe the satisfaction of being able to cut a toxic individual out of your life, even in a small capacity, is a good thing. Maybe being able to do that brings you more happiness than the music itself could have. It's really up to you. But from a utilitarian standpoint, I really just think you're doing yourself a disservice because your decision to not listen to an artist really only affects yourself and nobody else. Unless you're suddenly going to become an activist and start decrying the actions of one specific artist, you're not really affecting the outside world in any way. The goal of listening to music or consuming any artwork in general should be to enrich your life. So if you find music that makes you happy or makes your life better, then I think you have every right to enjoy that music regardless of who made it. Because ultimately, if a piece of music is having a positive impact on your life, then that indirectly allows you to have a positive impact on the people and the world around you. And isn't that kind of the end goal, I guess? So for these reasons, I think it's totally acceptable to listen to any music by any artist. And the more often you can truly separate art from the artist, the better. Moving into a bit of a tangential issue, though, I've seen the argument made that being able to separate art from the artist is actually a privilege. For example, if there was a really popular artist right now, and today they came out as being really, really racist against Chinese people, then yeah, I would kind of have a problem with that. It would be pretty hard for me personally to separate the art from the artist in that situation. And again, there's no hard and fast rules here. Every situation is a little different. But for people who aren't directly affected by this artist's problematic behavior, would it be a privilege for them to separate art from the artist? With this question, I want to tackle a couple different ideas. The privilege aspect of the listener, but also the financial support aspect. If you are a fan of someone and you find out that they're doing something terrible, or at least really bad, but you don't really use that newfound information to inform any of your future decisions, and you continue to financially support that artist, then yeah, I think you're kind of doing something wrong. If you are in any way contributing to an artist monetarily or continuing to spread good word about them, then you're giving that artist an opportunity to continue thriving. While this is not the same as actively endorsing someone's bad behavior, it really does toe the line, especially if money is involved. Enjoying a problematic artist's work should not imply that you're okay with their wrongdoings, but I think you should take some active ownership of what your support of that artist might contribute to. And I get it, canceling an artist is a lot easier than canceling their entire body of work, but I think there is a right and a wrong way to separating art from the artist. For example, a good friend of mine, Alexander, who you'll actually get to meet in one of the interviews, grew up on Kanye West's music. Kanye's always been quite a character, but in the last decade, he's really done some things to throw his character into question. And as a result, Alex does not want to support Mr. West in any shape or form, which includes streaming his music. Because when you stream an artist, you are supporting them monetarily. That's something that you should be cognizant of and that you should at least make some kind of personal acknowledgement about. If we're getting technical though, each time you stream an artist's song, they only make like $0.004. So even if you spent all of your time listening to one single artist, they'd probably make less money than if you bought their CD or t-shirt. This is where it kind of becomes a game of balancing morality and personal enjoyment. Is it okay for a shitty person to make even 1 cent off of your music listening, even if you get to enjoy basically a lifetime's worth of fantastic music? I believe the answer can be yes, because chances are the amount of happiness that you will personally gain by listening to that person's music far outweighs the financial blow that the artist would take if you and only you boycotted them. And if you really want to go the full distance, there's certainly ways in the age of the internet to continue enjoying an artist's music without paying for it. Pirating is still definitely a thing. There's also the issue of how openly you're supporting an artist. Music listening has always been a private affair, but in the past, you'd have to at least venture outside to procure your music. 20 years ago, if you wanted to buy the music of a known abuser at a record store, then you would have risked some hot, focused shame. But music streaming removes shame from the equation. You press a song title, and that song plays for you and only you. So if you're going to go to the extremes to pirate someone's music and then only listen to it in your own personal home by yourself, then I guess you should be able to do that guilt-free. What I'm getting at is if there's an artist that you really love and it comes out that they're a truly horrible person, while that is a pretty rough situation to find yourself in, I think it would ultimately be unhealthy for you to just try to completely remove that artist and their music from your life. You should try to find a way to reconcile how that artist and their output has helped shape who you are as a person. But you also need to accept the obligation to decry their terrible actions. Again, there are feasible ways to stop tangibly supporting that artist entirely while still enjoying their music in private. But you should probably take a step back from chanting their name from your rooftop. I think a lot of the concern, and I'm totally guilty of this, stems from our desperation to put art first in these kinds of discussions. I mean, what does making that priority say about us? Particularly in the film industry, since there really isn't a close parallel in the music industry. Why does our personal enjoyment of a movie matter more than an epidemic of abuse aided by an institution that hope we turn a blind eye? Part of the concern comes from the very real fact that supporting an artist and contributing to their advancement gives them an opportunity to continue doing shitty things. Just because you can separate art from an artist doesn't mean everyone else can. And it's almost to say that if you're able to separate an artist from their hurtful actions, then that indicates that you're just not able to relate to the victims of said artist. The racist example I came up with earlier works well for me in this argument because what happens if I have some friends that innocently share that artist's music online? In a way, aren't they indirectly giving that artist a platform to espouse their racist opinions? I mean, yes, but you can totally avoid doing that. I'm not asking you to move the earth itself when you find out that an artist is problematic or even contributes to a greater societal issue. And I'm not asking you to take on everyone else's burdens, but I am saying that you should be aware of where your art is coming from and how it's being made, the background of it. And in the digital age, it's really easy to avoid giving people money and to hold people accountable. Moving on, let's say you as a fan are put in a situation where you're simply not able to separate art from an artist. On a small scale, it could be that the artist is someone you personally know, but more commonly, it's probably a situation where you've liked an artist for a really long time, and now they come under fire for doing or saying something bad. And for you, there's simply no way to remove this newfound information from your mind. It can't be ignored. Every time you listen to that artist's music, you subconsciously remember the fucked up thing they said or did. And it makes you feel gross for even listening to that artist's music. Is that the reaction that you should expect for the rest of your life? Should you feel bad for enjoying music made by a bad person? This question is basically impossible to dissect because I really think it boils down to how you, as an individual, manage your relationships with everyone in your life. And that just bleeds far outside of the realm of listening to music. At what point do you draw the line and decide that someone, and in most cases, someone that you have not and probably will never meet in real life, has done something so wrong that it's just beyond forgiveness and they should just be completely forgotten? Is it when they're just an asshole, or when they're extremely offensive in general, or when they blatantly violate someone else's rights? There are plenty of musicians today that are still popular and have done all of these things and worse. So what are you to do when a musician that has had a very formative and positive impact on your life come out as being problematic? Does it depend on exactly how problematic they were? What if their music is such an important factor in your life that there's just no way for you to let go of it? Should you ultimately feel ashamed for continuing to enjoy and indirectly supporting that artist? In my opinion, no. For one, listening to an artist's music is absolutely not the same as endorsing their track record. You as the listener should be able to make that distinction. I'm not doing a bad thing just because I enjoy a bad person's music. I am able to recognize that this is an individual who is a great artist, but a not so great person based on the actions they've done in the real world. A musician can create music that changes the world in a positive way, but that doesn't suddenly absolve them of any wrongdoings. For me, this all goes back to the central idea that music is supposed to be a good thing in your life. If you're listening to music made by a bad person, but that makes your life better and indirectly enables you to make other people's lives better, then listen to whatever you want to listen to. Now, if you're actively apologizing on behalf of an artist's controversial actions, that's a different story. It's one thing to listen to music made by a hateful or abusive person, but it's an entirely different thing to say out loud that being hateful or abusive is A-okay. We should never forget this distinction. I mean, me telling someone that I like the album Off the Wall by Michael Jackson is absolutely not the same as me endorsing his actions that have gotten him embroiled in controversy. I don't think it's a crime for me to simply listen to whatever music I want to listen to. And this brings me to my next topic, which revolves around the topic of policing what other people are listening to. Is that something that you should do? Should you tell someone to not listen to a problematic artist? If someone in a casual conversation brings up an artist with a problematic past, but they're only highlighting a piece of work by that artist, then is that your invitation to suddenly interject and start talking about that artist's past? It definitely depends on the exact conversation that's taking place, but in my opinion, for the most part, no. You should not go out of your way to harshen the vibe if someone, presumably someone close to you, is just bringing up a positive thing in their life. For instance, if I'm just hanging out with my friend and they're just nonchalantly like, hey, you hear that new Chris Brown single? It's a banger. I'm not just going to be like, oh, Chris Brown, that dude's a fucking piece of shit and you should be embarrassed for listening to his music. Because that's not the topic that's being brought up at the moment. It's not my moral obligation to be constantly reminding all people about all the bad things ever done by anyone. Now, if the discussion were to take a bit of a different turn, my friend was like, wow, Chris Brown is my hero, and I look to him as an example of how I should live my life. Then I would be like, are you sure about that? Are you aware of some of the actions that he's guilty of? But I think I would only do that if the other person broached the subject of the artist's personal past to begin with. And I would do it in their best interest. But I'm not going to actively gatekeep what people should or shouldn't listen to for the sake of just being some martyr. Plus, even if you had some kind of moral agenda that you wanted to push on people, where would you draw the line for that sort of thing? I remember one time I just randomly brought up Charlie XCX in a conversation, and my friend was like, Charlie XCX, isn't she kind of arrogant? Doesn't she have like a big ego? I mean, sure, I guess, but is that really worth bringing up? I mean, there's plenty of assholes in the world. You're just kind of bringing down the mood for no good reason. You really need to highlight every person's character flaws every time they come up in a conversation? And what if it's something that's in like a gray area? What if you show a song to your friend and they're like, oh, this person is pro-life. How could you enjoy their music knowing that? Like, geez, if I wanted to have an abortion debate with you, then I would ask for your opinion on abortion. But I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking for your opinion on a song. So for the most part, I'm of the opinion that you should try your best to not control other people's lives and how they enjoy themselves. Especially if that person isn't causing problems for anyone else. I mean, all of us have had positive experiences with problematic artists in the past, right? Is it fair for us to deprive that opportunity from someone else? I think this topic can be a very slippery slope, though. If I'm my friend in that imaginary Chris Brown scenario, and I'm fully aware of Chris Brown's controversial past, then I'd probably be a little hesitant to heap praise onto someone, even if it's only in the realm of music. I think it's totally fine to experience and even enjoy art made by a bad person if it's in your own personal home, and maybe you should try to not burden other people with your fandom. Also, if you're just going to try to enforce some kind of moral agenda on the type of art that people are allowed to consume, then you're probably just going to wind up unintentionally being a hypocrite at some point. If your goal is to be some kind of walking encyclopedia, keeping tabs on all of the problematic actions of all people in the world, good luck with that. Instead of confronting people and shoving your ideologies down someone's throat, it might be better in an appropriate time and place to educate someone about an artist's rocky background, just as you would want to be educated, not attacked. And it also depends on who you're talking to. Some people actively want to know where their artwork is coming from. You can approach the topic without being antagonistic if you have the intent to simply spread information and educate people. The age of social media makes all this stuff easier than ever. So at the very least, we shouldn't be ignorant of an artist's past. But finally, all that stuff's just my own personal opinion. It's time to get some other people's opinions in here. First, I'm going to be interviewing my good friend Dan Rauchwerk, who is a founding member, along with his brother, of the folk band The Lords of Liechtenstein. But he also came out with his debut album 3 years ago in 2018.
Some tales have no heroes, some poems have no meaning, and
Hey guys, thanks for joining me. I'm here with my good friend Dan Rauchwerk of Lords of Liechtenstein fame, and he's also working on his second studio album. Sorry, he just told me it's in the works and should be coming down the pipeline soon. And I've got him along with me to ask him about separating art from the artist. How are you, man?
I'm doing great, Andre. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, man, I'm flattered to have you. I'm glad you're so gung-ho about me picking your brain about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get down to business. There's kind of 4 central questions that I want to revolve our conversation around. So the first one regarding separating art from the artist is, should we separate art from the artist? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's subjective, and I think it has to do with the scenario. So I think if it's sort of, it's also up to the individual's discretion, obviously, but if the artist is talking about the controversial topic that they're sort of in controversy for, just for random example, say there's a writer who writes about hitting people over the head with a crowbar, and then is controversial because in his free time he liked to hit people over the head with a crowbar. In that situation, you can't separate the art from the artist.
Sure.
In the situation of where he writes nice books about playing with puppies and then in his free time is hitting people over the head with the crowbar, is it the same person? So obviously, you can't condone those actions, but you can still read the books about puppies and maybe enjoy them for what they are in the moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in the musical realm, I guess it comes up a lot when, all songs are about love, right? So when people are writing songs about relationships or past relationships or toxic relationships or abusive relationships and stuff like that, that can kind of help listeners, find new meaning or find solace. But then when it comes out that individual is a perpetrator of abusive relationships, it's dang, you kind of stood for these themes and ideas, and now I kind of find out you're a hypocrite. It really takes away from what they were trying to get at in the first place.
100%.
Yeah, so I guess it does depend on. I kind of touch on this when I was rambling about it, but it's very situational. It's subjective. It depends on the listener. It depends on the context. But even when something like that happens, it's not to say that their previous work is not valid, right? If someone has strong takes on relationships and life in general, even if they do something bad that was related to what they were originally writing about, that doesn't mean their music still can't give something to people, right?
Right. And these are all aspects of who they are, and it will sit with people in different ways. You can't ever completely say, put up that wall and say, okay, this book is about puppies and this person lived a life of hitting people over the head with crowbars. I don't know why I got into that example, but that's apparently the one that I'm sticking with. But you can't really put up that wall because they're all aspects of the same person. And there's also a spectrum of sort of why that artist is controversial. It's one thing to, some artists are controversial because they challenged an oppressive government. Some artists are controversial because they did really bad things to people, just sort of out of nowhere. So I think it's on a spectrum of sort of the crimes, if you will, that they perpetrated.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's definitely for sure. Since we're on, I guess, the topic of the level of crime, if there even exists, do you ever think it becomes a situation where for one person, it's like easier to separate art from the artist, or where it might not be as easy for someone else. Basically, like the next question, do you think it's a privilege to be able to separate art from the artist?
I think privilege definitely plays into it. If you look at it, there's a lot more famous white male musicians that got away with stuff in the 50s, 60s, 70s.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Then there are, musicians of color, female musicians. There's still musicians that, you hear whisperings about, but things aren't really out in the open. So there's certainly privilege that plays into it. I think that's a big factor. That is not to excuse any bad actions by people, but it's just to say, if we're going to shine the spotlight on things like that, we should be shining the spotlight on everybody equally.
That's interesting. My intention with this question was as the listener. But that's interesting that you took it to the place of the artist. Yeah, I mean, that is one thing that someone brought up to me about, like, how, I guess, I don't want to say times have changed, because like in the 60s and 70s when rock stars sung about like sleeping with 16-year-olds, like that was not okay. Right. It's definitely not okay now, but they did it and they have careers. I guess they were in like a position of power or whatever that allowed them to get away with that kind of thing. But I guess especially because a lot of those like were white men, like guys can listen to their music without caring as much, but for girls it might be a little bit different. Like, oh, like that guy was like a predator, like it's easier for like you and me to like separate the art from the artist in a situation like that, but we should be considerate of like the effects that their actions had on like a specific group of people.
Yeah, I feel like in those situations, if we're listening to a male musician, we or male identifying musician, we do need to think a little bit harder. Like, hey, is it a privilege that I have that I can listen to this music and not think about sort of the questionable life that this person lived? Whereas somebody who might have experienced some kind of trauma, related to what that musician did, might have a lot more trouble or just not be able to listen to that musician because they can't separate the two.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think to your point, it privilege sort of plays into it on both ends of the scale, on the listener end and on the artist end.
Yeah, for sure. So if for us, there could be a situation where separating art from the artist is, I guess, maybe not hard, but we like grew up with a lot of that music, since we're talking about 60s and 70s music, and it kind of comes out that they've done bad things, or that we're becoming more cognizant of the fact that, this individual that I support, they're kind of shady, or like they have caused harm unto other people. But should you feel bad about continuing to enjoy someone's music like that if it is like comes to light that they are a bad person, or that they've like hurt other people?
I think it depends on whether you're financially supporting them or not. I think if you had already owned a record and you determine that you're okay with sort of listening to that record in private, I don't think you should necessarily feel guilty about that. I think, if you go out and, for whatever reason, if they're still out in the world and like playing a show and you go buy tickets to their show, or if you're buying their music online, like then you start to get into more questionable territory. You're financially supporting bad behavior, essentially. But if you're not financially supporting them, I think it sort of becomes a more individual decision. Am I okay with enjoying this type of art? Can I as an individual separate the art from the artist?
Yeah, this is where like my focus was, that it is very individual. Even with like music streaming, like if you stream someone all day, every day, you give them like a couple dollars like throughout your entire life. Like that's not enough for them to really do anything. That's like less than if you went to their show or bought their t-shirt or record or something like like that. So it's really like, on you. Like, is it okay for me to give this person even $1, just so I can like be a little bit happier for most of my life? So, I mean, I feel like maybe guilt is not the right word, or like feel bad or ashamed, but I feel like there is kind of ownership that should be taken, like I understand this music or this art has had like a profound effect on me, but it's kind of like tainted because the individual behind it like did this shitty thing or like represents this shitty thing. So maybe I should just be more aware of it when I kind of like bring this artist into light, or maybe I should just, not bring them to light at all. I should just always enjoy it by myself.
Right. And I think then again, it comes back to the point of how closely associated is the art with sort of the crimes that they perpetuated or the bad things that they did. Mm-hmm. For me, I'm not able to listen to John Lennon's songs about peace because, like, by many accounts, he was a pretty like violent person.
Sure.
And domestically abused his partners. I think that's a problem that a lot of people have with Bill Cosby. He made his name. I know you're focusing mostly on music, but I think he's a good example. He made his name as a family-friendly, nice guy comedian, and then comes out that he sexually abused a large number of women. I don't think you can really square the two anymore.
Yeah, and this goes since you brought it into like the world different than music. There isn't really like an analogy in music, or not an analogy, but like comparison with like the whole Harvey Weinstein situation in movies. Like that was like a whole institution where like women were being preyed on, right? So It wasn't that you were just supporting like one individual who did like a shitty thing on their own. You were like indirectly supporting this entire like moving like operation that was like just trampling on people's rights. So it really kind of, becomes a question of like, what am I really doing by like supporting art like this? Like I'm just enjoying art, but like indirectly I'm like empowering this really shitty thing to like continue happening.
Right. And it's I feel like it's also a lot more difficult when that person is behind the scenes in a larger position of power, because for Ryan Adams, for example, it's easy to not listen to Ryan Adams or to attend a Ryan Adams concert. Mm-hmm. But, Phil Spector, I think Phil Spector murdered someone, if I remember correctly. Like, do you just not listen to any Motown because Phil Spector produced those?
Yeah, you're right.
Those albums. The artist didn't have anything to do with Phil Spector, being a bad guy. So that, and then in the situation of Harvey Weinstein, do you not watch any movies that were produced by the Weinstein Company? That's a tougher call, I think, just because it spans so wide. It can be difficult to tell, like, hey, what movies did he touch? Or for Phil Spector, like, what projects did he touch?
Yeah, I don't think there's a good answer there, but I do think the important part is to just think more deeply about it, not just, even if you don't have a right answer, you can just kind of like know what you're a part of, like what you're really doing when you say an artist's name, or when you like promote a specific piece of work, or like what effect that can have, what effect you can have by like supporting an artist, just to like, think more deeply about the people that we support, especially like financially with our word of mouth.
Oh, 100%. This issue actually came to roost in the folk music community a few years ago, because I found out that this musician that the Lords of Liechtenstein had performed with and were friendly with, and a number of other people had accepted into and revered in the community, was a serial abuser. And, and then everybody's thinking, sure, like none of us, or at least we didn't know, but, does that sort of bring all of our complicity into question? That's, just as being part of the framework that allowed this musician to continue abusing his partners.
Dang, that is complicated. I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like it's really, this almost goes into a question of like our moral obligations, as people. Like, if you didn't know any better, there's nothing you could have done. But at a point, if you know that an individual does bad things, what steps should you take? Because most of the musicians we listen to, we're never going to meet in person. We can't really like affect their lives in a meaningful way. But we can affect other people's lives in a meaningful way, and that's kind of where like taking ownership is important. Like, should we be, preaching this person and what they represent to like other people? What does it really mean to like share artwork by someone? All that kind of stuff that can affect someone in like a bigger way than we anticipate.
Right. And I think it's a very different scenario if you're just like a listener to a very famous musician versus a musician in a scene that this person is traveling in. Mm-hmm. If you're a listener listening to a famous musician, sure, you might stream their song a few hundred times and they get $1 from it. Like, I feel like that's an easier call to make versus if it's a lower level musician traveling in a scene with other musicians, it's often, back channels where you hear whispers about things. I think it's really important for musicians to not just warn people privately away from that person, but also just to bring it out into the open. Mm-hmm. Because often those people thrive off of their ability to just wipe away sort of back channel chatter. It's a lot harder to counter something in public straight on. But especially in like the DIY music community, there's a lot of whisper campaigns about abusers that often don't get brought into public until those people have abused a large number of people.
Yeah, this is this basically spills into like a question of like how you manage your relationships, just in general, right? Like outside of music, like if you have a friend that does certain shitty things, like at what point do you step in and be like, hey, like you cannot, say those things or do those things, or like, hey man, like this is not okay, because we don't get that opportunity with famous artists. Like if a famous artist is like a little racist or like a little like, or is like abusive or just, does shitty things, we can't really affect them. We just have to cut them out of our lives or continue having them in our lives. But with someone you personally know, you kind of have an opportunity to step in and I guess do a lot of things. You're like, the context depends a lot, but are you going to have some kind of intervention or like kind of let people know what they're doing, or like take it to the side? And there's a lot of different things that go into like managing your relationship with anyone in your life, and it becomes a lot different when it's someone that you do know versus someone that you have no idea what.
100%. And I think the key there is really catching it early. If you hear somebody speaking in a certain way and you're like, hey, that's sort of damaging language that you're using, just hope that it's not affecting your actions and you're able to course correct them there. That can save everybody, a lot of harm in the long term. Whereas the longer that somebody thinks that certain behavior is okay or certain language is okay, then it sort of spirals, and it gets harder and harder to cut off. And if you do have that personal relationship, I think you do have an obligation to approach them as an individual, or maybe they have your trust as a friend, and you say, hey, as your friend, I have to tell you that you can't do this, or you can't say this. And to just sort of put a stop to it there if possible.
Yeah, man, that's totally right. You are definitely right. That's kind of like the end goal here, right? To reduce the amount of negative energy that's being put in the world, I guess.
Right, and I think we would hope that everybody would do it for us too. Like,
that's true.
Certainly, if I were hurting people as unintentionally as it might be, I would want somebody to let me know immediately. Hey, this song is... this comes up in folk music a lot because there's a lot of like old songs that we might not understand the terminology to. And, just lately people have been like, oh, that's actually like a racial slur that's not used anymore. And people will be like, oh, wow, I had like no idea. I know of a folk band that had to change their name because they got their name from an old folk song, and they didn't realize that the name that they had gotten from the folk song was in itself a slur. And so somebody called them out and they changed their band name, and so they're no longer perpetuating that. But otherwise, if it's something that requires outside insight or outside knowledge, I think it's really important to just share that, assume that they're coming from a place of meaning well and just not understanding and saying, hey, need to let you know this, and presumably they will be grateful. Obviously, you have to escalate if they don't, take your advice well or take heed of your input. But
you've basically segued into the last question that I wanted to ask you about. Should we tell people to not listen to problematic artists? And I think the examples you presented are really good. If someone is very, I guess not blatantly, but they're like breathing life into a word or like an idea that is maybe not harmful anymore, but was harmful in the past. That association exists, and we should be like, hey, like, I'm not sure if you're aware, but like this thing that you're saying or this word that you're using or whatever actually means this. That's like, I guess, a little bit more harmless. But is there kind of like a cutoff point for you? Like if someone brings up an artist in conversation, like some of the artists you mentioned, like Ryan Adams, like if like, oh, I love the new Ryan Adams album, like, are you going to interject and be like, oh, that guy's actually like has like an abusive past or something like that? What is kind of like the line for you?
I think it's incumbent upon us to let people know that there's a problematic nature to those artists. I think it again depends on the level of fame of that artist. If it's like a Ryan Adams, also like Ryan Adams is probably not going to put out much music anymore because like people probably don't want to listen to him.
I didn't know that.
I think it's important that people know, hey, John Lennon wasn't a great person. Ryan Adams isn't a great person. Like, just FYI, and just sharing that background with them. Ultimately, like, you can't stop people from listening to a certain band, especially now, with Spotify. But then again, if it's if it's somebody going to a DIY show by an artist who is problematic or who's doing things on the level of what John Lennon and Ryan Adams were doing, I think it's really important to warn people away, just for their own physical safety.
That's true.
If you're in a DIY basement with 50 people and this person, I don't want anybody I know being in a closed situation with that person. Like, maybe they keep that bad behavior private, but maybe they don't.
I mean, it definitely matters more when it's, again, someone you personally know.
Right.
For me, it's maybe it's just because I'm guilty of liking a lot of artists that have shitty pasts. But I don't know. It's hard. Like, if the Beatles come up in conversation, I'll be like, oh, the Beatles, John Lennon's like a piece of shit. Like it. Yeah. It really becomes like I don't want to say like a guessing game, but like it's very touch and go. Like, do I want to like harshen the vibe every time someone mentions the Beatles? Not really, right? Like, I guess I have to like trust that people are able to separate the artists themselves. And obviously if someone is like, oh, like John Lennon, what an icon, I'd be like, okay, that's like a little different,
Right.
But it really depends on, I guess it depends on what the person I'm talking to is like trying to appreciate about the art.
Right. 100%. And it also, like, by this point, I feel like most people know about John Lennon's behavior.
Sure.
People may not know about Ryan Adams. Ryan Adams is more of a niche figure, if you will, as as famous as he was.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. I think that I would certainly like to be educated about artists that I listen to where possible. So I would take it upon myself to try and educate other people. I guess in the right time and place. Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's important. And again, like if it's a friend versus somebody that you're casually talking to at a party. If it's about like a famous musician, you're gonna be like Andre, the guy who shares upsetting facts about musicians. I guess there's a time and place for everything.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool, man. That's all the questions I had for you. Any closing thoughts?
Uh, everybody should always be trying to be better people. I think ultimately certain things like the musicians just can't come back from. But you hope that in the rest of their lives that they're trying to atone for what they did.
Yeah, man, that's a whole nother can of worms that I'm not ready to open right now.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. Just I don't know, and support. I think it's important to support the artists that you know to be good people.
That's a good.
I don't know. There's a lot. I don't know. I mean, let's just by that token, everybody should be listening to Dolly Parton. So
there's nothing wrong with that, man. It's good advice.
Yeah. She's a good human being.
All right. Thank you so much, Dan, for taking the time to chat with me about this very complicated and ever-evolving topic. I truly appreciate your words of wisdom. I certainly learned something. Just for talking to you.
Thanks for having me, Andre. I really appreciate it, and what you're doing is so important and so interesting, and I wish you luck with it.
Thank you so much, man. That means the world to me. All right. Next up, I'll be speaking with my lifelong friend, Alexander, who is the founding member of the band Death is a Business. Way back in the day when the project started as a metal band, I was actually in the band playing guitar, although these days Death is a Business has taken on a bit of a new identity. I guess you could call it a bit of a Latin rock band now. My point being that Alex's musical trajectory has taken him to a lot of places, so he's definitely got some hot takes when it comes to music and all things music related.
We are going to Mars, and we don't need cars. Let's.
Hello, friends and family. Thank you so much for joining me. I've got my very dear friend, my lifelong friend, Alexander Leckman, with me on the call. And I'm here to pick his brain about some philosophical matters regarding separating art from the artist. Alex, if you don't know, is what would you call yourself? Would you call yourself the mastermind or the founder or the main initiative behind Death is a Business?
Definitely not the mastermind or the main initiative, but I can comfortably call myself the founder. And Death is a Business is currently a nomadic music ensemble primarily with myself and my partner Sonia on lead vocals. And it's Death is a Business has been many different things over the years, but right now we're pretty much roaming throughout the country and throughout the world, and we've been recording and making music with people in Mexico, Peru, New York, Milwaukee, so just and anywhere the winds take us.
Yes, it's been quite a journey. I've been happy to witness it and see it up close and personal on many occasions. I know that you're very passionate when it comes to making music and when it comes to listening to music as well. So I know you're a perfect candidate for me to unfurl these hard-hitting questions on for you.
And you, Andre, are in fact the original lead guitarist of the
Good times, man. Good times.
Hell yeah.
All right, so we can get started with this. The very first question that I want to ask you is, should we separate art from the artist? What are your thoughts on that?
I think we should. I do think we should, absolutely.
You think there are more benefits to separating the art from the artist than, I guess, consequences? What is your logic there?
Meaning that it's more beneficial to engage with the art and the artist separately than it would be to have to engage with them as a package deal.
Well, I share the same mindset as you. I think there are benefits to separating art from the artist for sure, but it is, no two situations are alike. There's definitely no perfect answer here. It comes down to a lot of different things. I'm definitely not saying we shouldn't hold people accountable for bad things that they do, but I am saying in the right time and place, there is room for a music fan to enjoy whatever music they want in a vacuum, without having to, I guess, feel guilty about enjoying art made by a bad person.
Okay. So I will say I think this question is kind of abstract. So
That's the whole point.
what? Yeah, I know. Yeah, what I want to say about this is, so okay. The answer is yes and no. I think you should separate the art from the artist, but I also don't think that you necessarily can, especially if you have access to information about the artist. If you're living in today's world where you can learn about anything and everyone, off the internet, off your smartphone, literally at your fingertips, you're you're gonna have access to a lot more context and history and background about your favorite artists. And I think if you're I think if you're a thoughtful person who wants to, I think if you want to understand the world better and you want to understand the people in it and the forces that shape our lives and our societies and our countries, whatever it is, I don't think you can separate art from the artist. So, for example, like with hip hop music, you cannot separate hip hop music from where it came from. You can't separate it from its origins in New York City, in the Bronx. You can't separate it from the predominantly black and Hispanic people that were making the music. You can't separate it from the history of that time, right, where New York City was in a fiscal crisis. It's like where do I even start here? Like New York City was basically falling apart. Social services were being cut. There was a huge increase in crime and poverty at that time, huge increase in unemployment in all the major formerly industrial great American cities, like, New York City, Detroit, obviously, we always remember, Chicago, like all across the country. I don't want to stray too far away from New York City, but you can't separate hip hop from what was happening in the Bronx in the early 1970s with everything that was going on, the widespread arsons of apartment buildings from basically indigent landlords trying to basically cash in on their insurance policies, increasing gang warfare again because of rising poverty and unemployment. All that, all of what was going on at the time. So if you want to understand hip hop music, or at least the hip hop music that was created at that time, you have to understand that history. And like, the same goes for any kind of style of music anywhere in the world that you could point to.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That understanding of this, a song that you're listening to, not just being, created in a vacuum, because no music is created in a vacuum, but an understanding of the historical context, why trends happen, why movements happen, why people feel the need to express themselves in certain ways. That's certainly important. And especially in hip hop, a lot of, 80s hip hop was pretty violent. They rapped about some fucked up stuff. They rapped about, killing other people and like all that wonderful, wonderful stuff. So I think, but that doesn't mean that we can't appreciate, some of the messaging or some of the artistry, or even some of like the sonic sounds that we're hearing, right? I guess, if we take it at face value and you kind of like look at all or a lot of rappers as being like, oh, this guy's a fucking murderer, like I shouldn't be listening to this guy's music, it kind of becomes like a bit of a gray area, right? So in that situation, I think it could be helpful to separate the persona of this individual with who they really are, and I guess their real life consequences on the real world.
Yeah, I definitely don't. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that I could say about that, and I didn't expect this to become a totally hip hop centric conversation, but there we go. And spoiler alert, I'm by no means an expert in hip hop, so yeah, but I mean I've heard a thing or two. I mean, so okay. Obviously, what everything that you just said is true, but what's really interesting to me about hip hop music is that it kind of encompasses so many different worldviews. I think if you look for any kind of ideology or politics or perspective in hip hop, you're gonna find it. Everything from just, as you said, a kid bragging about murdering someone, to the total opposite of that, trying to share a message about murder that's happening in your community and how to stop it. Like the Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, The Message, one of the all-time anthems of that early era of hip hop, and it's definitely a very, I hear it as a very uplifting message, or at least I hear it as shining a light on all the terrible things that were happening in New York City at that time. And then you look at a rapper like Tupac, and it's he's really interesting because he's got all of that. And literally on the same album, he'll have a song boasting about killing 5 cops, which obviously that never happened, like killing 5 cops in one encounter. And then in the next song, he has a whole rant about the war on drugs is disrupting our community and our unity, etc. So I think I guess all of this goes to say that hip hop is a great example of a style of music that can express and speak to a lot of the things that the artists who made it are experiencing in their lives.
Yeah, we're just, we've known each other a long time. We're just fucking 2 kids from the suburbs, man. We didn't grow up on the mean streets of the Bronx. We don't know firsthand what any of those things, are. But I feel like, this is kind of a window for us to understand a worldview that we never otherwise would be, I guess, presented with. So it's there's value to be had from that music regardless of who's making it, is kind of my point.
Yeah, I think... for me, any kind of music that I've heard growing up that had some kind of a political message or that seemed like it was trying to that where the lyrics were discussing some kind of very heavy topic, whether it's hip hop music talking about whatever's going on in the Bronx, or even something like War Pigs by Black Sabbath that's talking about the generals gathered in their masses, or System of a Down singing about the prison system. That was the kind of music that always made me, it always just awakened this curiosity in me to learn more about where that artist was coming from and what was happening in the time that they were living that was coming through this music. So okay, for example, I've been writing about drugs for the last 5 or 6 years, and now thankfully I'm able to do it professionally. And people always ask me what got you started, reporting about the war on drugs. And literally all that started it for me, all that sparked my fascination and my curiosity in drugs and drug policy was consuming music from the 60s, all the counterculture era music from the psychedelic bands and all that kind of stuff that got me, that was how I learned about marijuana and psychedelics and the hippie movement and the anti-war movement and all that kind of stuff. And like I said, that awakened the curiosity in me to learn more about what was happening at that time.
Yeah, that is, it's like you said, we have the ability in the age that we live in to better understand anyone that has a presence on the internet. We can understand where they're from and what they're really talking about, what their lives are about, and what they stand for. So information is very helpful for us to, inform our decisions. The whole goal here being that we can kind of think more critically about the music that we're appreciating, not only in, the art itself, but also the person that's making it. And since we are sticking with kind of this hip hop, umbrella, And we've kind of touched on the topic of people in a lot of these like scenes coming from not the best backgrounds or not the, I guess, most stable or safe backgrounds. I mean, someone like Kendrick Lamar, right? Like I don't like he rapped about murdering someone on To Pimp a Butterfly. That really like makes you. I guess it really makes Blacker the Berry talks about like why he cried about Trayvon Martin when he's killed someone blacker than him.
Sure, right.
So my point here being that, you know, they have very powerful messages to provide us, and they have like views of the world that are always helpful for us to take in. But does it kind of reach a point where we should feel bad about like liking specific artists even though they've done bad things?
Well, okay. Well, obviously in that example, that was you know, he literally did not kill anyone. He was taking like that song in that part of the album. He's singing about. I assume the way I interpret that song is that he's putting himself in the mindset of someone that's really involved in the gang life and gang activity, who also, like he said, who cried when Trayvon Martin was in the street, but they killed someone blacker than me. So he's kind of just, he's pointing out the hypocrisy, I guess, that he sees in gang culture, which obviously you and I have never been involved in that. So I assume that's coming from a real place. I assume that's coming from something in his lived experience that he's expressing. But so I think the question you're trying to get at really is, can we enjoy music that was made by artists who did bad things, right?
Basically, yeah.
So my perspective on this may be different from the average music listener, because I'm also a music... Huh?
That's great. I want to hear it.
Yeah, my perspective on this is different because I'm not just a music listener, I'm a music creator. Mm-hmm. I make music. Conceivably, I hope to do this for a living. Mm-hmm. So because of that, I have to be very... I have to study a lot of different kinds of music, you know. I have to study rock and roll. I have to study hip hop. I have to study electronic. I have to study country. And by studying all and learn all these different kinds of music and absorb it and take whatever influences I can from it. And part of, I think, the responsibility or the obligation of studying all this music is, like I said, understanding where they came from, but also understanding what are all these artists contributing to music, you know. And let's just go down a list and name off a bunch of famous musicians that have done terrible things. Jimmy Page. And we're not going to analyze them independently, but just off the top of my head, Jimmy Page, David Bowie, Marvin Gaye, Africa Bambaataa, Kanye West, sure, Tay-K, apparently Gene Simmons from Kiss. Okay, there we go. There's 7 artists that I just pulled out of the top of my head. All of those artists have contributed something very valuable to music. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, Jimmy Page. Okay, let's take 2 examples: Jimmy Page and Kanye West. These are 2 people that have left a really significant mark on the production of music, on songwriting, on instrumentation. Even in the case of Kanye, instrumentation and sampling and vocals. They've left a mark in terms of business, in terms of how to have a really successful career, in terms of live performance, both Jimmy Page with Led Zeppelin and obviously Kanye West with his live shows. So without even having to go any further, like, if you're me and you know, like, I want to make music for a living, I want to understand what have all the greats done to make great music and to be successful doing it. I have to study what they've done. I have to enjoy their music. I have to listen to their music. I have to consume and engage with their art and take what I can from it. And if and to put it in an even more cynical perspective, if I'm looking at this purely as an exchange, I have to take from them whatever valuable thing I can take from them, and because if I don't, I'm just shooting myself in the foot. Like, rock and roll music is very important to me. It's something that, it's arguably the reason why I make music. It's what got me started playing guitar. If I'm not willing to engage with what Jimmy Page and all the members of Led Zeppelin, if I'm not willing to engage with the music and the art that they made and take what valuable lessons I can take away from it, I'm only hurting myself. You see what I mean there?
That does make sense, and I appreciate that you're coming at it from like such a, I guess, pragmatic standpoint, because there's something for you to gain, and it is like kind of a transaction. You make it sound like not even like a personal choice; it's more of like a studious effort, which does kind of remove some of, I guess, the personal attachment. It's like an obligation that you're trying to fulfill to make yourself a better musician, and in order to do that, you need to extract data from these people regardless of their backgrounds, which again, I appreciate that outcome, but I don't know, it becomes, one thing that I brought up is that there isn't really like a comparison for this in the music world, but in the movie world, with all the like the Harvey Weinstein movies and like his, I guess, like status in the movie world, like it wasn't just that you were appreciating a piece of film. I guess it depends on how much you're supporting a film, but like you were, and like by watching some of those movies and paying to see some of those movies, you were indirectly like supporting a system that like preyed upon women, that like violated people's rights. So it really kind of goes to show like what kind of effect you can really have just by like appreciating like an artist's work regardless of the context, right? So I think, again, the end goal is kind of just to be more cognizant of our relationship with artists.
So it sounds like from what you're saying then, now the conversation is shifting to how do we hold artists accountable for their bad actions?
Yeah, sure. If that's a question you think you can answer.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the next logical step, because because so you mentioned like enjoying someone's music in a vacuum, but you literally can't enjoy someone's music in a vacuum, right? If your music is a product, and so by engaging with that product, you are financially supporting the person or group that created that product.
Well, even with music streaming these days, like if you spent all of your fucking time listening to one artist, they would probably make like $1. Like honestly, like you streaming a song makes like less than like a hundredth of a cent or something like that. So I feel like at that point it kind of becomes more of a moral question. Like you could spend all of your time listening to Kanye and enjoy your life and just be ignorantly like bliss, and you'd give Kanye West $1. Is that okay with you, or is it not okay with you? It really comes down to like personal preference.
Yeah. So I'll start by saying this. I do believe in, from like a ideological perspective, I do really believe in the power of consumers. I do believe in voting with your dollars.
Sure.
Because yeah, us as consumers, we have power, and by spending our money on different products or different services, we empower the people who create them. So in this example of whether it's Led Zeppelin or Kanye West or whatever, yeah, the question does become, if they're a bad person, then how are you empowering them by listening to their music or giving them your money? And as far as how do you hold bad artists accountable from the consumer's perspective, I think I would probably agree with you that I mean, because you're right. Streaming someone's music on Spotify really doesn't earn them a lot of money. Would I go and buy that artist's CD or flyer or T-shirt? Would I go and spend money on a ticket to see them in concert? Probably not.
Sure.
You know, I've flirted with the, you know, you can pirate someone's music, and you know, but I honestly, at this point, with the technology that we have, pirating someone's music and putting it on your device is almost harder than just like streaming it on Spotify, which I think is kind of the whole point of streaming services. But I had a thought. Oh, okay. So back to the conversation about accountability. So there's a way that consumers can hold business, right, and artists are businesses. There's a way that consumers can hold businesses accountable for their actions. But I also think what we can't leave out of the discussion is that the industry and the business itself has to hold artists accountable.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's something that has never really happened in the music industry. You know, like in the 70s, everyone in the music business knew what Jimmy Page and what David Bowie were doing, but no one held them accountable because they were just making so much money, and then, you know, all the other parts of the music supply chain, right? The concert promoters and the booking agents and the managers and the record labels and the publishers and the radio stations, et cetera, everyone was making so much money from this music that no one had an incentive to hold them accountable or put them out of a job or whatever it is. Same thing in, you know, if you look at the hip hop industry today, no one in the hip hop industry, at least not really that I see, tries that hard to hold artists accountable for what we know are bad actions that they've done. If anything, it's almost like doing something bad makes you more successful and makes you a more profitable brand. So it's just a way that it just goes to show that how kind of perverse the music industry itself is in terms of, you know, the incentives that all the different people that are part of the industry have.
Yeah, I mean, that took a negative turn. I mean, you know, my goal here isn't to make people make miracles happen or to like move the earth and the stars. You know, we're all individuals. This conversation really goes a lot deeper than, you know, just like any impact that any two people can have, and just about like how society views the world in general and stuff like that. At the end of the day, I think there are just, you know, how can you find like solace in the things that you do and the way that you live your life? And obviously, you know, I would hope that everyone has the goal in mind to, like, you know, force positive change onto the world and like put positive energy into the world and help people where it's possible. But, you know, you're right. You know, music industry, all industries are like multi-billion-dollar affairs that can't just be changed because someone did something shitty. You know, plenty of famous people have done shitty things and have never really faced the consequences of it. But is it, you know, at the end of the day, like, if you listen to Led Zeppelin and it makes you happy, I think that's fine. You know, like, if you stream Led Zeppelin every single day and you give Jimmy Page $1, I think that's fine. You know, I don't think it's worth like you losing your moral ground or like coming to the conclusion that you're a shitty person. You know, I think there are ways that we can, you know, stop artists from doing shitty things, or more importantly, stop people in our lives from doing shitty things. And there are ways that you can kind of like, I guess, separate yourself and your interaction with an artist from that artist's shitty actions on other people. You know, there's no real relationship between you and that thing that's happening.
It's tough to say, because yeah, I again, like, music because at the end of the day, music is a product. Mm-hmm. So to engage and enjoy with it is supporting that product and the person that creates it. I mean, I would agree with you that there's probably Okay, so I think really if this is something that's a concern to anyone, if there's any kind of battle, and this is kind of the problem with with just the way in general that we approach a lot of these issues from a political perspective, is that, okay, I'll give you a perfect example. Like let's get into it. Like the governor of Virginia, what's his name? I don't fucking know. Who cares? Funny thing, Virginia governors are term limited to 1 term. Did you know that?
I did not know that. Interesting.
Yeah, so they can never run for re-election. So whatever the asshole's name is, he's going to be out, I think, by the end of next year. But the governor of Virginia, he went through like a major scandal a year or two ago where, you know, it was like involving blackface, where
oh wow.
Yeah, where there was a bunch of like photos that came up from his time in college where he dressed in blackface to go to a party, and there was like pictures of it in the yearbook, and it turned into this, you know, huge scandal. And a lot of like prominent he is a Democratic governor, and so a lot of prominent Democratic politicians were calling for him to resign. And, you know, basically he goes out and says, I'm really, really sorry I did this. I've learned, but I'm not interested in resigning. And the whole thing kind of, you know, the whole scandal went on for a couple of weeks, and then everyone just forgot about it. And, you know, he didn't end up resigning. But the point of that story is, like, when something like that comes out, our instinct is to... Our instinct is to kind of damn the individual and the individual's actions, and to demand, you know, accountability from that individual, which is obviously and definitely a good thing. You know, individuals have to be accountable for their actions, but in this instance, right, when the issue at hand is racism, you know, that's like the core of that scandal. Getting the governor of Virginia to apologize for being racist, or even to resign for being racist, I don't think that that's a meaningful goal in and of itself to pursue, because nowhere in that discussion are we actually talking about systemic practical solutions for combating and ending and healing from racism. No, you know, it's so easy to get caught up in this very emotional situation of like, oh my God, this governor and blackface, and it's so terrible, and, you know, he's so terrible. But, you know, no one's talking about rising homelessness, you know, all throughout the country that's predominantly affecting black people. No one's talking about rising drug overdose rates that are more increasingly affecting black people. No one's, you know, nowhere in that discussion is anyone talking about, you know, just disparities in prison sentences and policing for black people. So it's like, the point I'm trying to make is that the media that the media ecosystem that we're all a part of, which, you know, includes traditional media outlets and then also social media platforms, it just amplifies these very emotional, sensationalistic stories about very personal issues like racism and sexism, etc. But it doesn't, you know, no one gets outraged about the fact that, you know, like, about roughly half of the homeless population in Texas is black. That doesn't become a scandal on Facebook or Twitter.
Dang, this has definitely changed topics immensely, but I appreciate it. I think, before we go too off the rails, I think it is this whole topic of accountability and just of change in general, right? There are a lot of issues that plague society, that plague the world, and most of them are incredibly complex and deeply rooted and do not have a one-size-fits-all solution. Like racism, you know, that is, God, that's a whole thing that is like deeply rooted in American history. And how do you solve racism? Like, where do you even begin to tackle a question like that? You know, how do you stop racism or solve racism? Who knows? But I think the goal there is to not, I guess, award someone like the governor of Virginia for being racist. I think is kind of the end goal there. Is that a good goal? Sure, why not? You know, I can agree with that. Should someone that is racist be in office? No. You know, I think that's like a pretty easy specific use case that we can address, which is why maybe people want to like latch onto it so easily, because it's is it progress? I mean, kind of, I guess, right? It's something. It's better than nothing. I think that's kind of the whole idea with holding people accountable in this kind of like social media sense. It's that when people put themselves out there, whether that be through politics or through making art or just, you know, they have a spotlight on them. They have like a platform to empower change and to like represent something. And if we find out that someone like that represents something that's not good, then they shouldn't be able to represent anything anymore. I think that's kind of the whole idea with this kind of, I guess, not cancel culture, but, you know, the idea of like holding people more accountably in this social media age.
So, are you talking about are you talking about famous successful artists having a platform through virtue of their fame and success and money, and how they choose to use that platform, that voice?
This kind of leads back into like the music issue, because if someone writes music about, I guess, like relationships or like interpersonal relationship issues or stuff like that, and it comes out that they're like abusive or that they have abused other people in relationships, then it kind of means that their whole persona was like fake, right? Like they were like writing these meaningful songs about like having trouble connecting with people or whatever, but they were just like a shitty person. Whereas if I don't exactly want to stick with the governor thing, but like if someone is just like writing EDM music that's like really fun to dance to at clubs and like at raves, but it comes out that they're an abusive person, well, their music doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the thing that they were guilty of. So they were never even really representing that topic to begin with. It kind of becomes like a different accountability issue, or it becomes a little bit easier to separate the art from the artist in that context, I guess. But regardless, it still means that them as an icon were representing something shitty, or like they had a platform to spread their name even though they did shitty things. And I guess that's ultimately the goal of what we want to stop. We should definitely hold people accountable, right? But can we still enjoy their music? Again, it kind of becomes like a very personal thing. That might be easier depending on the exact context. Again, everything is like a little different. You know, can a governor of a state have forward thinking? I have no fucking idea who the governor of Virginia is, but can he have like progressive ideas and about how we can tackle homelessness and how we can tackle like wealth disparity? I'm sure he can. Like anyone can, right? Like if they happen to be a racist person, that kind of makes the issue a little gray, but it doesn't mean they can't have good ideas. It doesn't mean like a shitty person can't make good music. It doesn't mean like, you know, their messages aren't worth value.
Okay, so I think we have to have a better understanding also of what it means to be, like what it means to be, you know, racist versus anti-racist, or sexist versus anti-sexist. I think for me that terminology is a lot murkier than a lot of people realize.
I mean, it's different for every person, you know. It's hard to clearly define something like that.
Because okay, we'll use the example of the governor again. Is the governor racist? Yes, but is not also probably all of the people in his cabinet, in his government, in his administration also racist? You can argue yes, but I think like and again to go back to the conversation about how we sensationalize these topics, I think the problem with kind of like singling out this person for their words and their actions and painting that as racist I think it's problematic because it implies that if you have never been caught wearing blackface at a party, then you're not racist. You know, can I say, hey, Andre, you would never wear blackface at a party, therefore you're not racist.
I think you're not giving people the benefit of the doubt. There are obviously multiple symptoms of racism, you know, that one being a pretty jarring one. I don't think people are ignorant enough to be like, oh, you know, only wearing blackface is the only thing that makes someone racist.
Maybe blackface is obviously kind of an extreme example, but okay, like let's use the example of the N-word. Like if you say, oh, I like this person was, you know, there was like a country artist that was caught, you know, shouting the N-word at a concert or something. I don't know. I don't even remember his name. You know, it's very easy to see that kind of story and think like, wow, I would never use the N-word. I would never like get drunk and shout the N-word. Like I'm not like I'm glad I'm not racist like that guy. I think
I see what you're saying.
I think I'm at the point in my life where I think that's a very problematic way to view the world because, and again, to tie this back to tie this back into like the political sphere, we've become kind of like very partisan and very tribalistic, and we've kind of very, as a culture, you know, we've so like segmented ourselves into these categories. Like, oh, you know, if I'm liberal or I'm democratic, that means that like I support ending racism, and like, you know, I support black people and Latinos, and Republicans don't. And, you know, look at Donald Trump and all of his supporters, and they're all like Blue Lives Matter, and they probably don't care about black people, and they only get like 5% of the black vote. So that tells you everything you need to know. I just think it's so problematic because to the conversation about what is racism, I think racism is something that exists at a much deeper level than people who use the N-word or wear blackface or, you know, wear Blue Lives Matter stickers on their truck or, you know, Trump flag in their window. If all the people in the world tomorrow stopped doing those things, obviously racism would still exist because it's a matter of like how is society structured, how is that structure expressed through, you know, public policy, law, through how resources are divided and allocated to different groups of people based on their skin color, based on their class, based on, you know, their geography, you know, national borders, based on if you were born in this country versus born in a different country, in a different part of the world. That and you know, I apply this kind of same modality to sexism. Sexism is not confined to people who call women, you know, bitches or hoes, or you know, to men to men who would never put a roofie in a woman's drink. Like, sexism exists on a much deeper level than that. And all I'm trying to say is that if we're really concerned about that, I think we have to kind of get out of this cultural mindset of this kind of like sensational mindset of getting so uptight when we see a famous person or a public figure that does these kind of very outwardly racist or sexist or whatever things, and you really use that as an opportunity to have a more serious conversation about how can we change what kind of structural aspects of society can we change, rather than just, you know, shaming people for how they express themselves.
Damn, dude, that is very insightful, and I'm happy that, you know, that's kind of the route that you want to take when approaching these issues, because again, they're very complicated and there's no one size fits all, and solving issues like that requires a lot of thought, and it requires a lot of education, and it requires you know, a lot of consideration to think about all of the moving parts in society and like the millions of people that occupy it, how we contribute to those different issues, or how maybe we think we don't contribute, but we really do. Stuff like that. This interview has definitely gone on longer than intended and has approached a lot of different topics I did not anticipate. So for the sake of wrapping up, I think
sure.
I think I would invite you to to give any of your closing thoughts if you have them.
Closing thoughts. Oh God. I'll try to keep it simple. Find a way to listen to whatever kind of music you enjoy and to consume whatever kind of art or media you enjoy, and also be a conscious consumer and be conscious of how you spend your dollars on any kind of product, and who are the people that make that product, and what are their values, and what kind of world are they trying to build, and does it align with the world that you're trying to build?
Dang, that's very well put. Can't say it better than that. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join me, Alex. I definitely learned something about accountability and about the bigger picture, and about how, on the individual scale, you truly do play a larger part in society. So again, thank you for your insight.
Absolutely, Andre. It's been a pleasure. Hope we can do this again soon. And just real quick to plug, if people want to check out our music, just go to deathisabusiness.com.
Yes, Death is a Business is fucking awesome. You guys should check them out. Them out, that is. For our final interview, I'm going to be speaking with Bronx rapper Dizzy Senze. Let's hear what she has to say.
I would tell you about my life, but that's too potent. That's too potent, nigga. I would tell you about my girl, but she's too potent. Potent, nigga. I would tell you about my team, but they too potent. They too potent.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us. I'm here with the very talented, multi-threat Bronx rapper Dizzy Senze. She's taken time out of her busy schedule to sit down with me and discuss the sometimes complex nature of appreciating artists. Absolutely. Thanks so much for getting on the call with me, Dizzy. How are you?
For sure. How are you? I'm good on this great Saturday morning. It's been a really busy week, but I'm up in here.
It's been busy for me as well, and it's been hot. But you know what? We're gonna take these obstacles and we're gonna overcome them.
Okay.
I'm happy to have a chill conversation with you. So
for sure.
Let's jump right into it. I have a few questions that I wanted to ask you, and the first one I want to start us off with is, do you think we should separate art from the artist?
I used to feel like, yes, we should separate art from the artist, but my opinion on that has definitely changed over the last 2 years or so.
Oh, yeah? It has something specifically.
Absolutely. I think that with cases like the R. Kelly trial.
Oh, sure.
Right? You can't separate art from the artist in that realm. Like, I felt immediately like no matter how many R. Kelly songs that I had loved, I couldn't separate them from the heinous things that he did as during his artist time. Like, he was doing heinous things while doing artist work and creating art and creating art out of those situations. So I feel like we can't really separate art from the artist in that realm too. And then also with the tragic death of the Brooklyn drill artist Pop Smoke. The content that he was already rapping about was so imperative to the things that kind of led up to his death that it's impossible to separate those things, whether I like those songs or not, from him as an artist. So yeah, no, I can't separate art from the artist.
Okay, that's a good answer. It sounds like it's like harder for you, but I guess there's plenty of candidates for this kind of discussion in the hip hop realm. Like more recently, I guess the Baby, or even a little bit more in the past, like XXX and Tentacion.
Yeah.
I guess for you, it might be hard to separate, someone, I guess, like R. Kelly from his music. But what happens in a situation if someone tells you that they like R. Kelly? Like, is it like an immediate turnoff, or like, what is your kind of reaction to that?
It isn't an immediate turnoff because that person probably can separate art from the artist, or it isn't necessarily following the negative aspects of the art. So in my aspect, it's like, I can understand why somebody could still listen to R. Kelly, but I'm just not one of those people. With the baby, I think it's more interesting because I think the baby kind of comes from a place of ignorance sometimes. Like, he just says things without thinking. But that is also reflective in his music and his music creation process. Although he's an incredible businessman, like, he makes great shock value decisions. Definitely pertaining to his recent events at like Rolling Loud, it was shock value things that he was saying. It didn't really stray away from his artist persona at all. So for me, it was like, yeah, the baby said something stupid, but he always says shock value things. So it didn't make me say, oh, I don't want to listen to the baby anymore because he feels this way to say things for shock value, because that's a part of his package. That's what comes with it. Even if what he said was problematic for obvious reasons of why it's problematic, from the world that he comes from and the crowd that he caters to, it's not really a big deal for them to hear something like that because they're used to the shock value things that he says. And he kind of presents himself as like that cousin at family reunions that just does the darnest things. So no, that's still not separating art from the artist, because essentially that's him.
That's true, yeah.
Kind of how he processes things.
I guess with a situation like the baby, like, he kind of dug himself a hole after, like, he had a chance to like do some damage control, but he totally did not for a while. Whereas
absolutely
someone like XXX, like, he did probably arguably shittier things, or he was accused of doing shittier things, but he kind of like he wanted to turn a new leaf. He wanted to like be better and have a positive change on the world. I think that also comes down to positive and negative PR as well. Sure. Right? Like, maybe the baby has great PR that he doesn't listen to. You know what I'm saying? Because the apology that he gave, it didn't necessarily sound like it came from the baby. It sounded like a well-crafted public relations response. For sure. And then for him to kind of keep posting things after, it's like, okay, clearly that wasn't a baby apology. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? It just wasn't him. It was something that he had to do to maybe save some of his endorsements. Whereas with XXX, the damage, and I think it's also like the act of what you're being accused of doing. The actions, certain times you have to show that you're going to do a positive change. You might not have even changed in this industry, but you have to show that you're making progress to change in that direction, to save your fans that are more consciously aware and more on top of social issues and actually care about those things. However, in both cases with XXX and the baby, they make hyper violent music for a specific crowd of people. So when it comes down to making logical decisions and maybe doing a logical apology, you might have a more impulsive response instead of the logical response, because that's what their music is founded on. That's true. Yeah, that's right. It becomes harder to separate people when they're kind of talking about a specific thing and representing a specific thing in their music.
For sure.
All right. So to go back to the R. Kelly example that you brought up, he obviously was predatory in nature and did some predatory stuff. But people still like him, unfortunately, I guess. He's still a pretty popular artist. Would you say that it's a privilege for people to separate art from the artist in a situation like that? Like, they're not recognizing the damage he's done, or they can't relate to his victims, or
I think when it comes down to separating art from the artist, or not being able to separate art from the artist, it comes down to a maturity factor at the end of the day. Not separating art from the artist and kind of like sitting down and actually processing heinous things that an artist has done and what role that plays in the music that they creates, that takes a whole bunch of comprehension skills. It does. If you don't really have that, or you're not at that level of comprehension skills, you're not gonna sit down and dissect each part of what an artist is doing. When we talk about someone like R. Kelly, we can stem back to songs and his predatory behavior back to when he was managing and songwriting Aaliyah. But it was easily swept under the rug because there was no concrete proof, although people knew something was wrong in that interaction. It's like, okay, we have this 15-year-old girl that is around this 27-year-old man at the time. Obviously, there's something just not right. And then all of the people that he's around at this time is underage. But in this music industry, you need concrete proof. You could be like, oh, this looks fishy and he's a little weird. But people will bypass that because it's just like, all right, I mean, most artists are weird. You get what I'm saying?
Sure.
Most artists are weird, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad people. But when does that red light go off? And separating art from the artist is exactly that. I think that's the whole sweeping things under the rug concept. Because it's like, all right, I can love your art, but I don't really like you. And it's like, nah, the art is tied into it because we're in a mind space when we create art. And I feel like, once again, just in R. Kelly's situation, you have him working with Aaliyah. You have him had worked with B2K when they're just starting out. And there was allegations in that camp too. And just seeing all of the people that he had interacted with and the successful songs that he was making as he was being a horrible person, it just hardens the blow a little bit because it's like you swept R. Kelly under the rug. Why? Because he reminds you of that creepy uncle at family reunions that says things that's like, man, he just says things that's so inappropriate, but that's our uncle and that's terrible.
Yeah, you're right. It does take a certain amount of like comprehension, and I guess you have to be proactive. You know, that's kind of my whole goal with this discussion is to get people to think more critically about how they incorporate artistry into their life, but also like what their appreciation of an artist really empowers. You know,
right.
Like if you listen to R. Kelly's music and you like, you know, breathe life into his name, you're kind of like you're in a way indirectly empowering something kind of shitty.
For sure. You're literally, kind of to an extent, and you know, you're listening to him on streaming services, you're putting money back into his pocket.
Yeah.
You are enabling him to be able to damage a lot more youth that doesn't need to be around this guy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we can't really separate art from the artist. I think it also just becomes to how grave the action that you did was. Is it something that we can sidestep? And then it's like, as people, what do we stand up for?
Yeah, it's a very individual, you know, thing for sure. Someone we haven't talked about, it's pretty big in the hip hop scene, is Kanye. Obviously, he's a very controversial figure, but he's a very musically beloved figure as well. For me, that's a pretty tough one because his music has had a pretty, you know, impactful. I can't think of a better word. Impactful impact on me. So I do try. Someone brought him up to me recently, and he was like, "Do you like Kanye?" And I was like, "I do like Kanye, but I kind of hesitate to bring him up in conversation."
For me, I've been a big Kanye West fan since Freshman Adjustment, right? And as you kind of go through Kanye's cycle as an artist, you can kind of see where changes began to happen for Kanye. And I think that there's also a lot of things with Kanye's story that is not necessarily as big in public knowledge as it should be. For example, if we think of Kanye, we think of the fact that he lost his mom. That can impact anybody in a negative way.
Sure.
On top of him noticing, you know, on top of him losing his mom, he also goes into this whole spiral time where he's like, he was bankrupt at a certain point, right? And that's a tough loss too. When you're at a financial burden, that can impact your mind as well. So now we have him losing his mom, him going financially bankrupt, and then him dissecting his contract, and within his publishing contract, finding out that he has to make music in perpetuity. Now, in layman's terms, that means you have to make music forever. You can never retire. Coming up with that at on top of losing your mom, going financially bankrupt, and not really having the proper outlet sources to do that, because your outlet that you had was making music, and now you're feeling like you're this factory now that has to keep making music till you die, or figure out a way to put your name on things until you're done. Like, your contract is never over. That can impact everybody in a totally crazy way.
Sure.
On top of losing your mom. You only get one mom.
Yeah.
You only get one mom. And then also finding out, like, man, in this publishing contract where I have to make music forever, this person that I thought was my friend kind of locked me into this contract. Like, that's betrayal, loss, grief, financial hardship. It's going to impact anybody to do things that's like an outcry for help. So then after he dissects all of this, everybody starts to say, oh, Kanye is losing his mind. He's losing his mind. And it's like, yes, to a degree, Kanye needs some very serious help with processing the things that has gotten him to this point. But also, it just seemed like he was doing things that was like, oh, my fans are not going to ride with me for these things. I'm going to put the Confederate flag on the back of my jacket. No one's going to buy this. No one's going to want to hear more Kanye art. But they kept buying it. He kept doing more and more outrageous things. It's like, all right, we got Yeezy, and the first pair of Yeezys were so amazing, and then it went to like this post-apocalyptic catalog of the new seasons of Yeezy wear, and people made fun of it, and it still sold out as soon as it released. And every season, every time Yeezys come out, it sells. It literally turned his financial hardships into success. Like, he came out of bankruptcy fast because of that. Because he had such a cult following of fans that was like, these are hot and I love Kanye. I can't see anything else but Kanye. So it's such a weird concept with Kanye, because it's like, man, there's so many levels and dimensions to kind of process when you think of his story, aside from the fact that he's a musical genius, man. He knows how to hear loops and put them together. And to an extent, like, yeah, we could be like, that's not as much work as maybe another producer may do with making one shot step by step. But he has an ear for what sounds great. And it's undeniable, and his fans can see that, and he builds more fans by doing this. So separating art from the artist with Kanye is definitely not something that I think will ever happen, because his art is in a process of like his beautiful traumas, even though the story behind it is very sad.
Yeah. Wow, I didn't realize you had such a hot take on Kanye, or such an impassioned take, but I appreciate it. Yeah, with Kanye, you know, it is a pretty complicated one. He's very popular, and, you know, I don't mean to like play devil's advocate, I guess, but it does, you know, there is a spectrum of badness that you can do. As far as we're aware, he hasn't physically hurt anyone to the degree as some of the other artists that we've mentioned. And I bring him up because, you know, he's done problematic things for sure. Does it become an issue for, or maybe if we like go back to like XXX, like he has pretty impassionate fans. Like, do you think there should be a point where if you know an artist that you like has done bad things, that you should feel bad if you continue to enjoy their music?
To an extent, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should. But I think it depends on your moral compass of what is bad. Right? Okay, yeah. Like, let's think here. Where are you from? Like,
me?
Yeah, where are you from?
I'm from North New Jersey.
North New Jersey.
Town. Just like the suburbs.
Suburbs of New Jersey, right?
Yeah.
I have grown up in the South Bronx, right?
You've seen more stuff than me. For sure.
So I've grown up in the South Bronx, in this area that they call, it's the Mott Haven section, but it's also called the Hub, because it's a shopping center that's surrounded by 8 projects, like consecutively.
Damn.
Like you walk out of one and there's another, right? So basically, I've grown up in a lot of negative environmental circumstances. Right? So what may be bad in my moral compass is going to be totally different than what is bad in your moral compass.
Sure.
And the reason why I say that is because I know, growing up in an area with negative environmental circumstances, that there is lack of options, a extreme increase in financial hardship, and lack of educational sources, and lack of recreational outlets. So you have people that are trying to create fun and create happy memories in a really negative place. And now let's also add sex, violence, and drugs, right? So now we're also being revealed and kind of brought into those type of circumstances at earlier ages, right? So what may be bad for me is going to be totally different than someone like you that might have grown up in the suburbs with more resources, with more outlets, with more things to do, and more time before you're exposed to what I would call adult situations. So now you have teenagers and preteens exposed to adult situations and maturing much faster. So their moral compass is a little wicked. So on their outlet in listening to artists, their moral compass is going to be a little bit conflicted.
Sure.
And also let's add the gang aspect into it, right? Because we have violence, but we also have gangs. So now gangs are introduced to these same preteens, teenagers, as they're developing immaturity and now having to do it much more rapidly because maybe they're not having enough food in their house. They are becoming aware of bills and paying them at 12 to 15, which is tough because you shouldn't really be at the bill stages of things until either you're 18 and decided like you don't want to go to college and you're probably pursuing jobs. So of course you have to understand the value of money and how to spend it and allocate it. But you're now processing that at 12 when you haven't even gone through puberty yet. So now you're 12 and you have 12-year-olds listening to the Pop Smokes, the Babies of the world. And their moral compass is a little strange. So separating art from the artist is probably happening for them because it's like, I mean, people do bad things, but are they bad people? And that outlet, you get what I'm saying? Whereas maybe someone from the suburbs is like, no, this person sells drugs, they're a bad person. Where someone in negative environmental circumstances is like, I mean, they're selling drugs because we have to pay rent, or they're selling drugs because we don't have the things that we need. So the rationality behind it becomes a completely different thing.
I mean, that's definitely important to take into account with this whole discussion, you know, like like with the R. Kelly situation or anyone, you know, there's a lot of the music industry is like male dominant for a long time, and that kind of leads to a nature where it's one-sided against females. So for someone like me, I'm a guy, you know, like I'm not affected by stuff like that, so it'd be way easier for me to like sweep that under the rug, like, oh, R. Kelly, like he abuses underage girls. I've never been an underage girl, not my problem, you know, like it's like my responsibility to like relate to people or try my best to relate to people and sympathize with them, even though I don't have the same background as them.
Right.
Like just because I like this person and I'm able to separate art from the artist doesn't mean everyone else is able to. And I should, you know, kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's something to definitely think about, especially when you think of what may cause people to be in such an outrage about certain things. I think when we look at the grand scheme of things, of course, there's a big outrage when it comes to R. Kelly because it's like, We've let someone that is an abuser and a perpetrator get big enough, and a predator at that, be big enough to fund the sick and heinous things that they do.
Yeah.
And of course, for women, when you look at the population of women in this world, maybe a good 80% of us have dealt with sexual harassment in some sort of form, whether minor or major.
Sure.
In general, this could be from the age of 9 to like the age to 30. You get what I'm saying? And it would ring simple across the board. If you got a whole bunch of women, excuse me, in a room and decided to be like, all right, if you've ever been sexually harassed, step forward. About 3/4 of the room is gonna step forward.
Sure, yeah.
And for men, it's like, wow, that's wicked, because that's not the type of experience that you have to walk in.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And even me, as a masculine presenting lesbian, can empathize with something like that. Mm-hmm. So I can understand the dimensions of how heinous that may be. However, maybe someone being homophobic in the general public might not necessarily be as big of an outrage or outcry and have that whole stormed front behind it of this is bad, because we can go into the LGBTQ stats and you might be like, all right, how was your coming out story? And a good 75% of us will be like, it was terrible. Yeah. Our parents shunned us. Maybe some of us got kicked out. It's very rare that it's like, oh, my parents were just like, okay.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's very rare that you hear that. So seeing something homophobic happen and maybe it not be as public of an outcry for that is like, okay, what's new about that?
Yeah.
But then now that people see more backing behind that LGBT sort of like, oh, this is wrong, it's like, well, come on, like, since when do we really care about all of this? And it's like, yeah, true, when did you really care about all of this?
Yeah.
That's when it becomes, oh, it's an agenda. And it's like, I mean, is it really an agenda, or it's just the support aspect that we never really had? I mean, you wouldn't really think about something like that because we're so used to people not standing up for LGBT people that it's such a shock when you see an outreach and it's like, oh, we're no longer going to endorse the baby. We're no longer going to support him because we believe in inclusion. And it's like, okay, this is new. Everybody is into inclusion now. Where was that when I was like 13, bro? That wasn't there. You get what I'm saying? But for women, I mean, there's more women in the world. Like, that's a gender sort of thing where it's like, all right, we are tired of sexual harassment. But that's no different from LGBT being like, we're tired of homophobia too. Separating art from the artist, it really does go into a whole maturity standpoint and moral compass. Depending on what you're willing to stand up for is going to depend how big you're gonna have an outcry about a situation.
Yeah. Just to wrap things up, just so we don't go too long, I do think that's kind of not one of the end goals of this whole discussion is kind of like recognize how our actions, even in like the smallest sense, can like impact the world. You know, like if we listen to an artist who is homophobic, we give them a platform to continue being homophobic. You know, that should not be okay. We should try our best to like stop doing that, you know. And it's not you're right, it's not like pushing an agenda. It's kind of like recognizing that our actions can hurt people, and we should minimize that for sure. You know, we should you know, be as supportive and as positive to the people around us as we can be.
I totally agree with that. We should be supportive to all of these causes. That's how the world should be. But if we were in a perfectly ideal world, we'd have this sense of euphoria, right? And this isn't a perfect world. It's a functional, dysfunctional world that will never be at a perfect point, will never appeal to everybody's beliefs. So we can settle for certain things, but we also have to know what we're not willing to settle for.
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, it might not be a perfect world, but we got to try. You know, we gotta keep trying. That's all we can do.
We got to try, but we have systems in place that will never make the world perfect. You get what I'm saying? We have capitalism. We have very extreme wealth in certain allocations in the world. Like, it's allocated to maybe not the best people, and it's not allocated necessarily to communities to help these communities. So with that whole classism struggle and just trying to remodel what the future will look like and how safe the future will be and how financially free it would be, I don't see that really happening for decades. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's like a whole restructuring of, I mean, America at least, you know, the experience that we know.
I don't see that happening, especially in a capitalist world where it's normalized for you to have debt until you die. You get what I'm saying? You spend most of your time paying back student loan debt to then end up with credit card debt to then end up with hospital bill debt. So you're gonna have debt until you die. And I mean, we're here on life, you know, be a great human, be a great person, enjoy life and enjoy the people that you have around you, regardless of what their gender may be, their orientation may be. And just be a great person. We all make mistakes. That's what we do as humans. But I think we can tell the difference of making a mistake and totally violating someone's rights.
Yeah,
which is when it comes to separating art from the artist and when that is okay. Like, it's all right if we are like, oh, we can separate art from the artist. I don't like that this person litters, right? Littering is it's a bad problem, but it's like, okay, he's not a bad person.
Yeah.
But if this person is a serial rapist, no, we're not separating art from the artist. If this person is a serial killer, as in they're out there murdering people and then glorifying that they're murdering people, no, we can't separate art from the artist there, because it's like, yo, this guy just said he shot up a whole club and we're dancing to it. And then he dies and we're like, how did he die? How did it get to this? And it's like, we heard how it got to this. We know what he did already. No, you can't separate that. You can't just talk about fruit salad with that person when you see them. You have to talk about important issues.
I think that's a very good note to end on. Thank you so much for joining me, Dizzy. Do you have what are you up to these days? Is there any music that you want people to go check out?
I have this track on Spotify called Dance, featuring the great beatbox duo, freaking top 2 in the world right now, Spider Horse. Great, awesome guys. I also have a beautiful track called To the Light with Jay Horde and the Beautiful Now. I am definitely working on a project of my own right now. Awesome. Lots of music. I also do photography and engineering and production, so if anybody really needs any of those services, I'm always here for that. But I've just been very busy and just living life, but also taking time to breathe and be a great person.
Good. That's all anyone can ask of you, Dizzy.
Right.
Well, thank you so much again for joining me. It was wonderful talking to you.
Absolutely.
And, I'll be sure to link some of that stuff, you know, in the description, and people can check it out. But thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
That's all the interviews. I highly recommend that you check out the music of everyone that I spoke to in this video. And big shout out to Dan, Alex, and Dizzy for all taking time out of their busy schedules to sit down with me. Final note that I'll end on with all of this is that we should all do our best to be kind to people, understand people, and not put negative energy in the world. Please and thank you.